It's like Lexi has a sixth sense. She always knows when I'm gonna be filming, and she chooses that moment to eat, to use the litter box, to meow for attention. It's like she knows. She sees the camera and she's like, oh yes, that's my cue. Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Jinaye and I am a flight attendant based in the United States. I do have quite the story on how I became a flight attendant. However, we are not here to talk about my story. We are here to talk about yours. Now, this is going to be the first in a series of videos on how to become a flight attendant, so please be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss it. I am so excited to be a part of your story and a part of your journey to becoming a flight attendant. Now, before we begin, I want to tell you what qualifies me to talk about how to become a flight attendant. Well, not only am I a flight attendant, but I have also applied to multiple airlines throughout the course of several years, and a lot of those applications were recent, and I have been successful in securing a CJO, which is a contingent job offer, to multiple airlines. So everything that I'm sharing with you in these series are things that I have experienced and tips that I have utilized successfully. Now, with all that being said, let's get into our first video, which is all about how to choose the right airline for you. Now, you don't have to be a frequent traveler to want to be a flight attendant. I know personally for me, my first interview, when I got flown out to the interview, I hadn't been on an airplane in years at that point. So I certainly was not a frequent traveler when I first started applying to airlines and when I first started getting job offers from airlines. So I had no idea what the difference between a mainline airline and a regional airline was. I didn't know what the difference between a legacy and a low-cost carrier was. I didn't even know this difference between a Boeing and an Airbus, or a wide body and a narrow body. I had absolutely no idea. So these are things that I'm going to be explaining to you in this video, because this is going to help you on your journey in deciding what airline is right for you. Now, a disclaimer, there are corporate flight attendants. However, I am not a corporate flight attendant and I don't really have information about becoming a corporate flight attendant. So for purposes of this video, I am going to be discussing commercial aviation. So let's start with the difference between a mainline carrier and a regional carrier. I have worked for both. The first airline that I worked for was a regional carrier, and now I currently work for a mainline carrier. Now, the regional carriers, they carry a smaller amount of passengers. There are going to be less flight attendants on board the plane. In fact, my regional carrier had either one flight attendant or two flight attendants, and that is pretty standard for regional carriers. You're going to have one or the other or both. Now, the day that I submitted an application for the regional airline that I worked for was the day that I figured out what a regional airline was. So regional airlines fly into regional airports. They might fly into international airports, but they do a lot of regional flying out of hubs, such as Chicago, which is where I was based with my regional airline. It is the major hub for my airline. So your regional airlines are gonna be smaller aircrafts. They're gonna have less flight attendants, and they're also gonna have less passengers. Typically, regional airlines have 76 or less seats on their aircrafts. Now, regional aircrafts are also gonna be different. You're gonna have your Embraer 145, your Embraer 175, your CRJ 200, CRJ 700, CRJ 900. Those are the types of aircrafts that regional airlines fly. Regional airlines also typically fly under major legacy carriers, however, not always. For example, you may book a ticket on United Airlines, and if you are going to like a smaller regional market, you may be flying a completely different airline that's just contracted to fly for United to that airport. Now, regional airlines typically fly to smaller cities, but not always. For my regional airline, we would fly to small cities such as Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is a favorite of mine. Or we would fly to Austin, Texas, which is another favorite of mine. So it really varies with the market of that regional airlines. Some regional airlines have a broader market and fly to more places, whereas some don't fly to as many places. So to further on that, there are some regional airlines that only fly United flying or only fly American flying. There are some regional airlines that'll fly under multiple airlines. In fact, there's a regional airline that flies for Delta, that flies for United, American, and Alaska. And then there's other regional airlines that are owned by the major airline. For example, the regional airline that I worked for was wholly owned by a major US carrier. And that means that our planes were only branded for that carrier. So everything that you saw on the aircraft was just like you were on the major carrier's aircraft. There was no difference besides the planes themselves. So in the eyes of the customer, there was no difference between the regional airline and the legacy airline that owns it. Now, I've already used the term legacy mainline carrier, so let's get into what that is and what a mainline carrier is as opposed to a regional carrier. Now, not every mainline carrier is a legacy carrier. However, every legacy carrier is a mainline carrier. Now, mainline carriers fall into 3 different categories. You have your legacy carriers, you have your low-cost carriers, and you have your ultra low-cost carriers. And all of those airlines fall under the mainline umbrella. Now, when I am talking about legacy carriers, I mean American, United, Delta, and Alaska. Examples of low-cost carriers would be airlines like Sun Country or Southwest. And you have your ultra low-cost carriers such as Spirit, Frontier, and Allegiant. Now, I'm going to take us back to the regional carriers just for a moment because I want to talk about the specific regional carriers. Now, you may never have heard of any of these regional airlines because when you book a ticket, you're not booking it for these regional airlines. You are booking it for a legacy carrier, and that route might be operated by one of these regional airlines. So we have what I call the wholly owns. Now, these are Envoy, PSA, and Piedmont. Those are the 3 wholly owned regional carriers under the American Airlines umbrella. So American Airlines owns these airlines. So those are the wholly owns. They are not going to fly for any other carrier. They are only going to fly for American. Next, we have Mesa, which flies under United Airlines and currently flies under American Airlines. However, they will not be operating under American Airlines as of spring of 2023. Republic operates for United, American, and Delta. Air Wisconsin currently operates for United. However, in the spring of 2023, Air Wisconsin will no longer operate for United and they will operate for American Airlines instead. Next, we have SkyWest, who operates for all 4 legacy carriers, which is United, Delta, Alaska, and American. We also have Commute Air, who operates for United, and GoJet, who operates for United. And next we have Endeavor, which is a wholly owned airline for Delta, and Horizon, who is a wholly owned airline for Alaska. And there is Silver and JSX, which are regional airlines that are not affiliated with legacy carriers. Now, another difference between regional and mainline carriers is mainline carriers go international more so than regional carriers do. Regional carriers typically only go internationally to Canada or Mexico, although my regional carrier that I worked for also did go to the Bahamas and Honduras. Now, most regional carriers don't do international with the exception of Canada and Mexico. However, some regional carriers do go a little more into Central America. And the same goes for low-cost carriers as well as ultra low-cost carriers. Their international flights are typically Canada, Mexico, and Central American flying, and they may branch out a little bit into South America, but they don't have a long-haul international flying. And the same goes for Alaska, even though they are a mainline legacy carrier. So all of these airlines don't do long-haul international, so who does? United, American, and Delta are going to be the airlines that are going to be doing those long-haul international flying, and they're also the airlines that have wide-body aircrafts. Now, what is a wide-body aircraft? If you ever get on a plane and there are 2 different aisles that you could potentially go down depending on where your seat is, that's a wide-body aircraft. They are big. These are big planes. Now, if you've ever traveled from the United States to a European destination, chances are you are on a wide-body aircraft. Wide-body aircrafts don't always fly international. They do have some domestic routes, especially when it is not peak season for international flying. And those planes carry so many people. I mean, you're looking at 200, 300 or more passengers on board the wide-body aircrafts. Now, narrow-body aircrafts are going to be the typical aircrafts that you're going to see when you're flying domestically, whether it's a regional airline, a legacy airline, a low-cost carrier. Those are typically going to be narrow-body aircrafts. Although, like I said, there are some exceptions to that. I have personally flown wide-body aircrafts domestically previously. Now, this is definitely important information to know in choosing what airline is going to be the right airline for you. If flying long-haul international is something that is a must for you, then you're going to want to stick with United, American, or Delta, because those are the airlines that do that flying. If that's not something that's important to you, that does open up your range of airlines tremendously. If you don't care about flying long-haul international at all, if you don't care about working on wide-body aircrafts, go for a low-cost or ultra-low-cost carrier or a regional airline. Those are still really great airlines to work for. For example, when I was looking for other airlines besides my regional airline to work for, having the potential to work a wide-body aircraft on a long-haul international flight was something that was important for me. So now that we know about the types of airlines, let's get into interviewing the airline. Now, what do I mean by interviewing the airline? I am a firm believer that when you are going into a job interview, they aren't just interviewing you, you are interviewing that company. And for airlines, that is absolutely no difference. So the first step in interviewing the airline, we already accomplished with all the knowledge that we gained in the first part of this video. So congratulations, yay! So next step in interviewing the airline, we are gonna look into pros and cons that you might run into when you're researching airlines. Now, there are pros and cons to every airline, and I'm not calling out any airline, and something that might be a pro for one person might be a con for another person. So this information is purely informative. First, we're gonna talk about union versus non-union airlines. There are a lot of careers out there that have labor unions, and aviation is no different. Although, while every airline falls under the Railroad Labor Act, not every airline has a union for their flight attendants. Specific airlines that I know that don't have unions for their flight attendants are Delta and SkyWest. Now, not having a labor union might be a con for some people, and it might be a pro. And some people just don't care. So if an airline having a union is something that's really important to you, definitely do your research. And next, and this is probably what you're really thinking about when applying to airlines, and that is flight benefits. Like, it is the top draw to going into working for an airline. Now, don't get me wrong, I love being a flight attendant. I love aviation. However, flight benefits was definitely a perk when I first started applying to this career. And each airline does their flight benefits a little bit differently, so it is worth researching, because let's be real, flight benefits are important to you. I'm just being real. I'm throwing it out there. Flight benefits are super important and one of the best perks to the job. So I am well versed in flight benefits for my company. I am somewhat versed in flight benefits for other companies. And I do like the way that my company does their flight benefits, and one of the perks and draws of this specific company for me. So as a crew member, you have access to flight benefits not just on your own airline, but you can also fly other airlines as well, which is such an amazing perk to being a flight attendant, and it also helps with commuting, which is something that we'll go into later in this video. Now, some differences that you might see with different airlines in regards to their flight benefits. Some airlines, in fact, most airlines, their flight benefits are based on seniority. Now, what does that mean? That means when they have the list of the people who are on standby for a flight, because yes, you will be flying standby every single time, the list goes in order of company seniority for that employee, and that is something that most airlines do. There is also an airline that does not base it on seniority. They base the standby list on check-in time. So that first person who is checking it in 24 hours ahead of their flight is going to be the first person on the list. And that could be a millisecond, you guys. I have hit that check-in button at the second that the clock goes to check-in time, and I'll be number 5 on the list. Like, how did that happen? It is by the millisecond sometimes when it is a flight that is a high demand for standbys. Another perk for certain airlines is that you get priority on your own metal. Now, let me tell you what that means. Say I am a flight attendant for one airline, but I am flying on another airline. Of course, the employees of said other airline are gonna have priority for a seat before me, who doesn't work for that airline. Another example of that is regional airlines that are not wholly owned. When I worked for a regional, I did work for a regional that was wholly owned, and at my wholly owned carrier, I had the exact same flight benefits as those for the legacy mainline carrier that my wholly owned was owned by. However, there were also non-wholly owned regional carriers that operated for the same legacy mainline carrier as my regional carrier did. But because they did work under different carriers, their travel benefits are different than mine were. For example, if I got my place pretty high up on the standby list because of my check-in time, however, we're gonna use SkyWest as an example. Say a SkyWest flight attendant checked in after me, so they were lower on the standby list. However, if the flight in question is a flight that is operated by SkyWest, they would get priority over me because I was not a SkyWest employee and they are flying on their own metal. So that is definitely something to keep in mind when you're looking at flight benefit perks for different airlines. Now, the next set of information that is super important to know when you're deciding what airline is right for you is gonna be bases. If you don't want to relocate, look at what airlines have bases near your home city, or maybe you do live in a major city. Look at what airline is based there. And we definitely can't talk about bases without talking about commuting. Now, just because an airline has a base near your home city doesn't necessarily mean that you are gonna get based there. Seniority is everything when it comes to the airlines, and some airlines bases are more senior than others. In fact, there are airlines where one base may be super junior for them, but then another airline, that base is super senior for them. So even if you do not plan on relocating, and even if there is a major airport near where you currently live, you do have to prepare for the concept of commuting. And let me tell you before we get into it, commuting is tough. So you do need to keep that in mind when you are picking what airlines to apply to. Are these airlines bases something that is gonna be commutable for you? So ways to find out is to look at each airline that you're thinking of applying to, find out where their bases are. If their bases are not in your city, who flies from your city to those bases? So definitely do your research as far as your local airport and as far as these airlines that you are applying to and what their bases are. Now, something else in regards to bases and commuting that is insanely important to mention, even if you don't plan on relocating and the airline asks you, are you willing to relocate? Always say yes. Always say yes. Never say no to that question. A lot of times that question is a deal breaker. If you say no, you are gonna get a no from that airline. So you have to have the willingness to relocate, and understand that if you don't relocate, you are gonna have to be commuting and you are gonna be responsible for getting yourself to work on time. Now, I can definitely make a whole nother video talking about commuting. If you would like that, comment down below. Let me know. I will gladly do it. But for the purposes of this video, whether or not you are capable of commuting is definitely something that is super important. And another thing about bases is just because an airline has a base doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna be able to get that base out of training. Say you are planning on relocating and you get a certain base out of training, it may or may not have been the base that you wanted. You can transfer bases. Some bases may take longer to transfer to than others, and some bases may not have openings very often. However, you can transfer bases. Now, some airlines do have limits on base transfers. For example, some airlines you have to wait a year before you're able to transfer bases, or maybe you can only transfer bases once during a certain period of time. So that is something that is different for every airline. I think I pretty much covered the bases and commuting, but if you have any more questions, please let me know down below. I'd be happy to answer them or do a whole nother video. So now that we've gone over some pros and cons of different airlines and what to look out for when you're interviewing an airline, let's get into what airlines you should apply for. Should you apply for one airline or should you apply to multiple different airlines? People do have different opinions on this. However, I do want to give you as much information as possible so that you can form your own opinion, because after all, this is your career that we're talking about. So let's say that with all of your research in airlines, you have like a small list of airlines that you would really like to work for. Maybe you've narrowed it down to one, or maybe you're the opposite. Maybe you're like, I don't care, I just want to be a flight attendant. That's really going to determine whether or not you should apply to multiple airlines or just apply to one or a couple. Now, if you don't care, if you're like, I just really want to be a flight attendant, apply to every airline with the open application. You do you be that person. That's totally fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, if you have an absolute dream airline that you want to work for, I would say don't put your eggs in one basket. However, if you are determined for that airline, it wouldn't hurt to just apply for that specific airline, especially if it is an instance where you don't want to relocate and say this airline has a base that's attainable near where you are currently located. For example, if you already live in New York City and you do not want to leave New York, there are plenty of airlines that have bases near New York City, and those are very attainable bases to get. So if you are set on only applying to airlines that have New York City bases, then that is what's going to work for you. Although some people, like myself included, they have that one airline that they've always dreamed of working for one reason or another. Maybe it's the first airline you ever flew on as a kid, and that's what made you dream of becoming a flight attendant one day, and that's the airline that you specifically want to work for. I'm going to tell you, go for it. Go for it. But I also do want to caution putting all of your eggs in one basket, because getting a job in the airlines, especially the major carriers, is not easy, which is the whole point of this series, is to help guide you through it, because it is tough. A lot of the legacy and major carriers get hundreds of thousands of applications every year, and they may only have a few thousand positions open, and many people don't get hired the first time that they apply. So please keep that in mind if you are only choosing to apply to one airline. I will say another perk to applying to more than just your dream airline is giving other airlines a chance for you to interview them. Now, another reason that I would caution only applying to one airline is interview practice. Airlines' application processes are very similar to each other, and it could be amazing interview practice if you were interviewing for other airlines, especially if you're still waiting to hear back from your dream airline, because applying to airlines can take a very long time. So even if you do have your dream airline, but there are other airlines that you are hesitant on, it might be worth a shot to put in your application, because that airline might surprise you. So I know from personal experience how I was set on working for my dream airline, and then I applied to another airline on a whim, and I loved the interview process for that airline. It was such a great experience, and I do have that full story in another video, so I will link it down below if you're interested in watching that. Now that I've given you all the information that I possibly can on how to find the right airline for you, how do I know if they're hiring? Good question. So you could just stalk the career website of those certain airlines. A lot of airlines also do have alerts, so if they don't currently have open applications, you can sign up for a career profile and they'll alert you when there's positions that are open. So that is an amazing way to figure out how other airlines are hiring. Another great way to figure out how airlines are hiring is via social media. So Facebook has so many flight attendant career groups. Some of them are general flight attendant career connection type groups, and some of them are career groups for specific airlines. However, they are a great source of information for when airlines are going to be hiring. Now, some airlines only open up their application for hours at a time, maybe a couple times a year. Some airlines might have their applications open for months at a time. It just depends on the airline as well as their demand and need for flight attendants. So even if you have found your dream airline, they might not necessarily have applications open. Now, even if the airlines that you want to apply to do not currently have applications open, there is plenty of things that you can do in the meantime to prepare for when those applications do open. And those are things that I'm going to be discussing in my next video, which is all about the application and assessment process of becoming a flight attendant. If you are on your journey to becoming a flight attendant, or if this career is just exciting for you, I have so much valuable insight and behind the scenes information on this super exciting career. So be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in my next video. Bye. Are you really going to be scratching in that box right now? Is she really gonna be scratching in that box right now? I'm gonna have a whole blooper reel about just Lexi annoying me. It's like Lexi has a sixth sense. She always knows when I'm gonna be filming, and she chooses that moment to eat, to use the litter box, to meow for attention. It's like she knows. She sees the camera and she's like, oh yes, that's my cue. Huh, little girl? Don't jump on me. Lexi! You are gonna drive me nuts. I'm going to put that up. Because, oh my gosh. Would it be mean of me if I put my cat's food in like a different room? Now Lexi just needs to stop eating. Stop! Stop it. I'm filming. I will kick you out of this room. Lexi, do not claw on this stupid thing. Lexi, stop. Really? Really? I'm gonna kick her out. She's never this annoying. Oh, I like that. Okay. Ah, we're done. We're done. We're finally done. This took so long.
Fly so much higher. Fly